How badly did the Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of mess up Marvel in general for the way they publish? It's an interesting idea because if you're following along, Fox held the rights to the X-Men and to the Fantastic Four and a handful of other characters, and Marvel took an approach of de-emphasizing some of those when their own cinematic universe was going on. Why did that do some kind of irreparable harm to certain characters in Marvel, and can it be recovered? Hey everybody, this is Perch. This is an interesting one because it's a question that I got in email. Thank you again for that. And it was, can the Marvel characters recover, the ones that were part of the Fox deal, even though Disney now owns them? Is it possible? Like characters like Wolverine or the Fantastic Four continue to feel like they are lost and adrift in many cases within Marvel. And can they ever gain their form or glory? And was this partly because Marvel deliberately kind of de-emphasized them when Disney didn't have the rights to those movies? I think that's a fascinating question. So, first off, the answer I think the first answer is yes. There has been some damage done to properties that were not under Disney's control, and part of it was less that I get the damage done is kind of a nebulous statement. So I think on some ways you can say that Disney maybe intentionally buried some characters and that did them harm. In other ways, you could say Disney just put a focus on characters like Captain America and Iron Man, Thor, and they became the center of the Marvel universe over the last 15 years. It's easy to forget it's been a while. In fact, there's many comic readers who grew up during the MCU phase of comics, and they don't really have context for the old comics. I've started to have either readers come in or people that I talk to that say that, hey, why did Marvel care so much about Wolverine? Why were these X-Men such a big deal? It feels like the further I go back in lines that the X-Men are suddenly crossing over everywhere, and they're like the '80s seem to be all about the X-Men. I mean, what gives? And if you're a longtime comic fan, that's a comment that makes your head spin a little bit because you grew up in a lot of cases with. I mean, there was an era from the late '70s through the '90s where the X-Men were the thing. That was what drove the entire company. I mean, 25 years or so. And so as things have shifted, it's strange now to see this new audience come in that has no real context for that and doesn't really understand why they're there in the first place. I think that's where some damage has been done because by excluding them from the spotlight, it's caused people to you almost have to rebuild them all over again. And I think this is where you get into a weird little kind of limbo, the no man's land middle ground, where you have basically creators that kind of understand, intellectually that the X-Men and some of these titles are big and you should do things with them. But they've also got 15 plus years where they haven't been paid attention to, so they no longer know how to connect with those fans. They can go with some nostalgia stuff, but the stories often feel very hollow. It's kind of like a band where the band took several years to develop a following, get a fan base going, and really kind of develop this huge popularity. And then years and years later, all they do is they play greatest hits. And so new people coming in hear the greatest hits, and they're cool and it's exciting, but they didn't go through the same journey of the band becoming popular, kind of finding their artistic style and maybe going to concerts and all the rest. So they don't have the context anymore. And I think a lot of comics fit into that zone. I think that comics like Fantastic Four are really in a very, very bizarre state because what made that comic powerful in the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s, that DNA is almost completely gone today. And writers who, the last great, I think, writer for Fantastic Four was Hickman. And, even there, he was trying to kind of get some big things going with that story. But ever since, it's been very kind of by the numbers. In some cases, it feels like kind of the greatest hits of the comic, and it's lost all or most of its history. And it's like, well, we got the Torch, and he's doing some immature stuff, and the Thing is grumbly, and Reed's doing some sciencey stuff, and Sue's kind of the smart one holding it together from a a family standpoint, and Doctor Doom's doing something Doctor Doomish, egotistical over there. So we'll mess around with him for a little bit. It doesn't feel like there's any kind of driving force on that title anymore, and to blame that, I mean, you do have to say in the last 15 years you've seen Marvel by and large ignore that book and kind of shuffle it backwards. So it doesn't have prominence. It doesn't have fans coming to it, recognizing why it's important. And I think the same thing is true of X-Men and others. Now, I think some people have speculated that Marvel deliberately tried to screw with those characters as a way to kind of get back at Fox. And I don't think that that's true. I just think that they said, well, our money is coming from the things we own. So put 95% of all the dollars and time and creative energy there, and whatever's left is left. And I don't think that's that's kind of just capitalism. That's not necessarily an evil plot. It's just called we're gonna invest our time and our energy and our money where we're getting the best return, and that's what we're gonna do. That's smart business. The challenge is they had now they've got those properties back, and some of their efforts, like all the things they did with the Inhumans, didn't pan out. So they're left with a weakened, formerly great line that now no longer has the same amount of market power that it once did. And they haven't had good things come up and replace it. So in many cases, they do have to start all over. And I think it's a case where a lot of the writers and people who come onto the X-Men, and in many cases, I think Hickman, with everything he's doing with Krakoa and all the rest, if you look at it, he is kind of wiping the floor clean and just trying to reintroduce what all these characters mean. But in some cases, they've been kind of devolved to, very two-dimensional characters. I think the Cyclops, Jean Grey, Wolverine, Triangle, how Emma Frost fits in there, it all does feel very, kind of by the numbers. There's not a lot of depth going on there. You look at the kind of character development that Grant Morrison did during his run, or Claremont, yes, or Byrne when he was on it, or others. I mean, even Scott Lobdell, there was more nuance to these characters. Even more recently with stuff that Matt Fraction and Kieran Gillian did, there was a little bit more nuance. Now they're very much just, here's Cyclops, he's the serious one, and here's Jean, she's the warm and happy one. Here's Storm, she's the tough, fierce one, and Wolverine's the brawler one. And I mean, they've been kind of reduced significantly, and to build that back up again will take a lot of time, and no guarantee it's successful. But I do think you can draw a link to what happened with the MCU and kind of the attention, the focus with the core characters they were promoting there, and kind of the negligence to the characters that were once great over on the Marvel side. But what do you think? Does this theory have merit? Is this what you believe as well? Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think, if there's a correlation here between the two. And also, do you think these characters can get back to being, big characters again? Is that a possibility? What kind of effort is that going to take? Leave me a comment below. Hey, subscribe if you like the content the channel puts out. Good audio, bad audio, whatever it happens to be. I always appreciate the subscriptions. Thanks for being here. Very much, this is what makes it great for me. So thank you all for joining and being a part of it. Follow me on the main pillars of social media. You can send me an email at comicsperch@gmail.com. And most importantly, thanks for listening.